All right, now we've gotten to the point where we're going to go over the meal card. The meal card has two sides to it. One side is essentially a grocery list of healthy foods, and the other side is essentially a little measurement system I've come up with to help you measure quantities of food that you'll be putting in each of your meals. So let's first go over this side over here. It is divided into three main parts: protein, carbohydrates, oils, and fats. The protein section has three sub-components, the first one being birds and animals, the second one being seafood, and the third one being dairy and legumes. Now, you'll notice there's a coding system and a color coding system on this card. There is meaning behind it. I won't go into too much detail, but essentially what you have over here is one classification of meats according to genus, and then another one over here, and then another one over here. And you'll notice that next to a specific food item, for example, the top left over here, beef and liver, there's EN1. EN stands for endomorphic. So if you're more of an endomorphic body type, that means overweight type of person, then that is a food that's more appropriate for you because it has EN next to it. Over here as well as also EN. And then over here you see EC. EC stands for ectomorphic. Now, this coding system is not to be taken literally. It's just a way to think about why you're eating certain foods versus other foods. However, as you progress and as you change, your meal system or your nutrition system will be completely customized to you, and you'll eventually end up having a mix of both ectomorphic and endomorphic meal foods or types of food in your meal plan. So don't overthink it. But basically, endomorphic, ectomorphic, ME stands for mesomorphic. But once again, it's not to be taken literally. It's just an outline that allows me to coach you more efficiently. So, birds and animals, seafood, dairy and legumes, that's protein. EN foods, EN number 2. So there's EN1 here, EN2, and then you get things with the number 3 next to it. 1 means it's the highest quality possible food choice you can make. 2 means highest possible choice or best choice, and 3 meaning the least high quality choice of food you can make. So naturally, dairy and legumes will often have the number 3 because, truth be told, if you're trying to get lean, having all that sugar usually won't do you good, and a lot of people are lactose intolerant as well as having food sensitivities to dairy, eggs, and other things. So, EN1, EN2, EN3, EC over here. Let's go into carbohydrates. Carbohydrates separate into grains, vegetables, and fruits. Now, you'll notice that there's arrows pointing up and arrows pointing out down in the carbohydrate section. If an arrow is pointing up, that means it'll cause a rise in blood sugar. If there's an arrow pointing down, it means that the blood sugar will stay low. So very often we're trying to control blood sugar, and very often you will not be eating foods that have an arrow pointing up unless you're eating it before and after your workout. If there's an S next to it, it means it's a superfood. Now, don't get me wrong, the whole idea of superfoods is kind of silly, but these are particularly great foods that'll help you reach your nutrient goals in that specific category, of course. And those are your sections for carbohydrates. Again, they're separated into EN foods, EC foods, and ME foods. Arrow pointing up, arrow pointing down. And depending on what I tell you to do, you can only eat specific foods based on the instructions I give you. I will do a demonstration for you in a moment. Finally, the third section is oils and fats, divided into nuts and seeds, butter, and oil. And you'll notice that there is EN1/EC3 in these specific foods over here. That means that for an endomorphic body type, nuts and seeds tend to be a higher priority food, EN1, while for ectomorphic, nuts and seeds or oil are basically high-fat foods, tend to be a lower priority, EC3. That is why they're coded that way. If you go into the butter and oil section over here, it is the same situation. You have EC3 foods, EN foods, EN1 foods. I'm not going to get into how these things are organized, but essentially it's there for you to categorize and to prioritize your food selection And you'll also notice that for butters and oils, these tend to be things you cook with. I've put next to it little codes that explain to you at which temperatures or heats you should cook these specific fats with. So for example, ghee butter is cooked at high heat, HH, high heat. That's what that means. Butter should be cooked at medium heat. Almond oil, high heat. Flax, medium heat, low heat. Sunflower oil, low heat. These are also called the smoking points of fat and oils. So you could also Google that and you could see at what temperatures it's safe to heat certain fats and oils. Otherwise, you're going to give yourself a host of other problems in your body if you're raising the temperature of an oil or fat too much and you're consuming that. So that is the first side of the meal card. Again, write your name, write the date. Very often, what I'll do is I'll tell you to write what I need you to be eating right over here. More specifically, this is a little notes section, and that'll be something that I write in your members account, and I'll ask you to write it down right over here. For example, for this specific person, this imaginary person here, I'll say meal number 1. And I want you to write this down because, first of all, I'm not there to write it down for you. And secondly, it'll just make sure that everything's very clear to you in terms of what needs to be done. So meal number 1, I'll say, for meal number 1, I only want you to eat EN foods, EN1 and EN2, and arrow pointing down foods. All right, and that's basically what that would mean. Meal 2, I'll say, this is just an example, pulling this out of my hat here, EN 1, 2, and 3, and EC1 foods, right? So that limits which foods you're able to eat in this basic list over here. So for meal 1, I may be saying, get 2 palms of protein, 2 palms, but you're only allowed to take your protein from EN ranked foods 1 and 2, which means over here, over here. And even though this is a protein source over here, these are ME3 foods, you will not be eating those foods because I limited you to EN foods for meal 1 for meal 1. So as you can see, even though it seems like a pretty open-ended system, it could get very specific to your needs and food choices and food type based on what I tell you to write over here or based on what I tell you to do. It's essentially a meal plan that gives you a lot more choice or freedom as opposed to just your standard meal plan. And then I would write this for all your meals. Meal 3, meal 4. And you just find a place to write this over here, and that's it, that's all. There's nothing else to it. Like I said, I would write this in your members account, and you would just take that information, write it by hand over here, and you could carry that information with you everywhere. That concludes this side of the meal card. Another thing I tell my clients to do is, if you ever want to graph your weight, you could actually graph it out over here. That's why it's in that graph paper form. I don't know, I like to do it. And then if you have any notes or anything you want to write, don't take up all the space writing a whole bunch of stuff. But if there's anything you want to add in there, if I said something specific about, avoid eggs, then you'll write avoid eggs over here for whatever reason. Things of that nature. This is just your piece of loose leaf paper to jot down what needs to be jotted down. That